Hi guys, welcome to the review of the Nikon's new mirrorless Z50 APS-C camera. Are you torn in making the decision between getting the new Nikon APS-C Z50 mirrorless camera or maybe investing in its bigger brother, the Z6? If you're a photographer shooting cityscape architecture, or maybe you shoot more video and time-lapse like me, this review will help you make that decision, as I will be covering these aspects between the two cameras, and at the end I will tell you which one I like more than the other. So let's start the review. My name is Michael. A brief introduction about me. I am a time-lapse architecture, cityscape and travel photographer. I also do reviews of equipment that I use, like the Nikon equipment. I've got two Z6s that I use for all my time-lapse work. I find them great. And now that the new Nikon Z50 mirrorless came out, I was myself interested in seeing if I can incorporate a APS-C 20 megapixel DX camera into my workflow, into some of the specifically long telephoto shots, where instead of having 24 megapixels at say 500mm, I would still have 20.9 megapixels that this camera shoots at 750mm. So in order to even crop further 4K out of that, I would have more length, more focal distance that I could zoom into, which is pretty cool. And if you've seen some of the stuff that I do and how far of the cities I go to shoot some of the sunset or cityscapes, you know that good quality at far away distance is something that matters a lot to me. For full disclaimer, yes, I have worked with Nikon in the past on a few campaigns, and Nikon UK has kindly loaned me the new Z50 with the 16-50 and the 50-250mm lens to see how I find it. So this review potentially is a little bit biased because I am a Nikon user. I have two Z6s for my day-to-day workflow. Let's start by looking in isolation what the Z50 is and the lenses that it's got that are native to the DX format. Well, basically it's a tiny little brother of the Z6. It's got pretty much mostly the same capabilities that the Z6 has. Yeah, it is 1/3 lighter at only 450 grams with battery and SD card in. It feels really light. It is smaller. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I find actually the Z6 being perfect in size. So the smaller camera tends to take some time before you get actually used to it. However, with the 16-50 lens, it feels ridiculously light. When I was carrying this camera with this lens and the other 50-250 lens in my small man bag, it just felt I'm like not carrying any weight at all compared to some of the other walks that I do with like a 500 Z6 and a couple of other lenses. This was a ridiculously light setup. The 16-50 lens isn't an amazing lens, unfortunately. It's only from 3.5 f-stop at 16, and it goes all the way to 6.3 if you zoom it to 50mm. So it's not ideal. It's not a prime, it's not a constant aperture lens like a 24-70 that could be a f2.8, but it is small. It is ridiculously small. The monitor at the back is as clear and as sharp as the Z6 monitor. Same goes for me, at least in my personal opinion, the EVF. It is smaller, the EVF. You don't get to see as much of a screen as you see on the Z6, but the clarity and the sharpness and the pixel detail is phenomenal. I'm not going to quote you specific numbers or specs of the screen or the EVF, but the experience of watching your content, video, photos, previews and photos you took on it just feels really good. It shoots onto SD cards. Everyone's got SD cards. SD cards are cheap. Even like large 512 gigabytes SD cards are not that expensive anymore, so that's a good thing. It's got a new type of battery that's much smaller than the batteries for the Z6, yet it seems to last really long time. With one battery, taking some videos, taking some photos on an afternoon walk from 3 o'clock till 8 o'clock, I managed to still run on one battery. I haven't done full test how long one battery lasts and can record video, but I've recorded 25 minutes of fireworks on this camera because I started rolling the camera just a bit before, and I wanted, after the fireworks finished, to run it a bit after to see the smoke all go away and maybe speed it up in video, and it just, yeah, recorded fine. So 25 minutes, I think, dropped 1 bar off the battery, so that's pretty good. Both the 16 to 50 and the 50 to 250 lenses are stabilized, because Nikon made a rather controversial decision, at least in my opinion, that the sensor inside the body will not be stabilized. Unlike the Z6, Z7, the full frame mirrorless system, where the sensor is stabilized in body and all the lenses aren't. But we're going to get into that later on. Both lenses produce sharp images, the quality is good, the ISO capability is just slightly worse than Z6 from my personal opinion, but the main aspect of both lenses that I find a bit problematic is, however, they're tiny, they're small, they collapse, they make it more even compact. The 3.5 that's on a wide angle on this specific 16 to 50 lens moves to 6.3 at 50mm, which is about a 75mm equivalent, and that's not great at 75mm. The build of the lenses seems fine and they're not expensive. On their own, they potentially can be, but if you buy the two lenses with the Z50, you're only paying £1,000 at the moment. The price of this camera already has been reduced around Christmas, so for £1,000 you get the Z50 and the two lenses. I think that's a pretty decent deal. Both lenses are built well, both lenses produce great image quality. However, you just cannot compare them to shooting to primes. We're talking completely different price range of a lens, but they are good enough, I think. And if you get them in a bundled package with the Z50, you will pay £1,000 for the body and two lenses. I think that's a great deal. Seeing that this price for that bundle was reduced since around Christmas only to $999, I think it is a great deal. The 50 to 250mm lens that's also included in the 1000 package is a 4.5 f-stop at 50, and it goes to 6.3 at 250mm, which is also not great, but still for a lens this size. I remember having one of my first DSLR cameras with a kit lens. This size was the 18 to 55 that I had with a kit lens on my body. However, this folded is much smaller, extends a little bit to 50, and then doubles up in size to 250mm. The whole system feels so light. It is stabilized, and I had great results just holding it handheld and shooting at 250mm. The resulting images were sharp. I shot cityscapes from far away, and I could zoom in into the image and see literally loads of detail. Of course, I'm guessing there will be more lenses released for the DXZ system at some point. At the moment, there's only these two lenses. However, you can just put native Z full frame lenses onto the DX body, and you'll just get a 1.5 equivalent multiplier of that focal length. If you put a 24mm f1.8 that I'll show you in a moment, you'll get an equivalent of 36mm at that f-stop. It's worth mentioning here that with the body sensor not being stabilized, that full frame Z mount lens is also not stabilized. So you're getting no stabilization that's optical. You can only turn on electronical stabilization, which ideally I do not recommend. So any full frame Z mount lenses that you'll be putting on the Z50, there will be no optical stabilization, unfortunately. But of course, you can mount F-mount lenses that are stabilized onto the Z50 via the same FTZ adapter that I use for the full frame body, the Z6. So if the lens is stabilized, you will be getting stabilization for the old F-mount lenses. time-lapse. Moving on to video, let's first start with normal video and we'll move into time-lapse later. It shoots 4K, 24, 25, 30 frames a second. It covers the full DX frame, there's no cropping. The same gets shot at 1080, 24, 25, 30, 60, well, 50 and 60, and then 100 and 120 frames a second in 1080, and everything gets shot in the full DX mode so the full coverage of the sensor of the DX body. Unfortunately, something that I was really looking forward to seeing on this camera, and it's not there, there is no further crop for 4K or 1080. There just isn't a further crop into the sensor where it would read out just the 4K pixel to pixel ratio. I was really looking forward to that, but it is not available on this camera, so it has to just pixel bin or whatever it does the full frame sensor into the 4K or 1080. There is no choice of shooting DX or like even double DX or whatever double DX is called, 2 times crop. Like on the Z6, you can shoot FX or DX mode in, for example, 4K and 1080s. So it's quite sad that it's not there, but the quality of the 4K and the 1080 looks just as good as the native internal recorded quality on the Z6, so that's brilliant. ISO was able to crank up to 3200 while shooting the fireworks. I'm looking at this video and it's looking good, so even ISO at higher ISO levels isn't interfering, isn't introducing a lot of noise, and I have all the noise reductions off because I'd rather reduce the noise in post than in camera. That's always a better recommended setting. Moving on to time-lapse, and this is where it gets really exciting. Basically, this Z50 mirrorless 20.9 megapixel body has got the same time-lapse features that the Z6, the bigger brother, has. So it has the standard in-body intervalometer that can save your RAW files or just JPEGs if you wish. You can choose the interval, you can choose a timer, delay, it lets you exposure smooth, which is a great feature on the Z6, and it was transferred onto the Z50. And best of all, something that comes really handy when I've got jobs where I'm delivering time-lapse content immediately rather than having to edit them, it shoots also 4K time-lapses in body. So you can set the interval and the shutter duration, everything in manual, aperture priority, or the P mode, even time-lapse mode that I discussed in this video if you want to check it out. And the best thing is, this is now another camera that the Nikon lineup has that shoots the in-body time-lapses, which saves up to a 4K file time-lapse immediately after it finishes the time-lapse. This is a mode that helps you shoot time-lapses, and if you want to edit straight away and you're not too bothered about reducing highlights and shadows and having that raw quality to work with, this is a brilliant way to shoot time-lapses that you end up having just a file straight away that you can incorporate into your movie. With regards to time-lapse speeds, I've done some tests to check how fast the camera can write a file before it can take another photo, and it turns out it is just as fast as Z6. So basically the minimum waiting time you need between the camera finish shooting one photo and starts the next one without dropping any frames is 0.4 of a second. So on a typical 1 second interval when you're shooting traffic moving or clouds or something, I prefer shooting 1 second interval when there's a lot of things moving. Your maximum shutter speed can be 0.6 of a second. It needs that 0.4 of a second to write the file, and then we'll always take the next shot. It won't skip frames. I've tried it on a 400 sequence, I think, and there was no skipped frames. There's also a half a second interval mode, and the longest shutter that I was able to have on the half a second interval mode was just 0.1 of a second, so 1/10 of a second. It still needed that 4/10 of a second to write the file, and then it was taking every next raw file every half a second. It's worth mentioning that in that mode, obviously my focus was off, my white balance was set on manual. Every possible setting that I could change to manual was manual, so that the camera had to do the least amount of thinking, processing. It was just saving the raw files. And then I tested to see if this will also work in the time-lapse video mode, saving a 4K file, and it did exactly the same result. It needs 0.4 of a second to not skip frames, and it will save your time-lapse in whatever, either the intervalometer mode, saving RAWs, or the in-body 4K movie. And one night before New Year's Eve, a friend told me that the London Eye was testing its light. So I went out with the Z50 with a couple of different lenses, and I shot these time lapses. I shot all of them in RAW, all of them in 1 second interval, and the results and the stuff that I was able to pull from RAW and make the final time lapse movie look, I am literally blown away that this mirrorless APS-C camera can do it this well. It is literally as good quality as I would have shot it on my Z6. So what about vlogging on the Z50, you ask? Well, this camera is being promoted as a vlogger's camera because it's got the flip down screen, and it works. It is pretty cool actually. If you grab it gently and try to not touch none of the focus rings, it will focus. There's face tracking on the Z50 just as good as it is on the Z6. It tracks your face and you can see the screen. You just have to be careful to not touch with your thumb, if you're holding it this way, any of the focusing rings, because then the facial focus tracking will stop working because you've just overridden the focus as if you wanted to focus on something else. Good thing about it is it worked brilliantly during the day. The face tracking just works, and even if you shoot in aperture priority mode, it will just adjust the aperture to the speed that it needs, and the 3.5 gives a little bit of depth of field behind you if you want to vlog with that kind of a look. So this is just a test of walking with the 18 to 50, 60 to 50 lens, autofocus on my face, external microphone, the video mic go, and I'm seeing issues because we're at ISO 20,000. Yeah, currently at ISO 16,000, and the focus tracking on my face has been losing me, unfortunately. So it's not a good sign. It would be alright, I could get used to this, shooting at a hand's distance, but at beyond ISO 10,000, I think it was losing me. So this is not a good indication of the face tracking. In bright light, it seems to be keeping up, but when it was dark, it wasn't great. Oh yeah, even now. Okay, so this should be slightly better setup. I should be in focus. I'm on the 12mm Leo f2.8 at 2.8. The ISO seems to be swinging around 8,000, 5,000, 8,000 from what I've seen. But as I'm shooting in manual focus on this lens, as it's on the manual, yeah, I think it's a decent result. It's still a heavy setup to carry in one hand for a prolonged period of time, but I think it does a decent job. I'm really interested to see how the 4K 24p is holding up at such high ISOs in video mode. The slightly disappointing element is that at night at 3.5, because 3.5 isn't really a good enough aperture to be vlogging at night. If you want to be at 1/50th of a second, I was hitting something at about 12,800 ISO, 16,000 ISO, and at that time the face tracking was losing me. Even though I was talking to the camera just with my hand extended, I was always in the frame, it was going out of focus. During the daytime, as you see in this example, it works perfectly. This is shot on the native 16 to 50mm lens, so this is currently shooting at 16mm at 3.5 aperture, and I've got the screen below me. However, it's not being held by a GorillaPod, I'm just holding it by my hand. That you somewhat can see, but 16mm is 24mm field of view, so it's not the widest. 3.5 probably gives a little bit of depth of field in the background. I don't know, it's usable, definitely. I think this can be used, but it's not the most convenient way of holding the camera. Let's see what the view will change if I put a Gorilla Pod, and the lens and the camera will be slightly further away, probably not much than this or something. And now I don't see myself in the flip down monitor. I'm just holding the camera literally by the end of the Joby Gorilla Pod. Because the camera is so light, I could feel like I could be vlogging in this way for much longer. My hand doesn't get tired at all. And by holding it as sort of 45-degree angle, that's how I positioned the Gorilla Pod to the camera can be slightly further away, so the 24mm might just be more usable. Another question you might ask about vlogging: is 16mm on the 16-50 enough? Because it's an equivalent of 24mm. I extended my hand and I got a reasonable composition when I was vlogging to the camera that I'd be happy with. However, I'd ideally have it a bit wider. I like a 20mm look, or even something around 16. So I'm kind of waiting for the next lens that would be released for the DX system that would be more friendly vlogger's lens. The bad thing is, with any flip down screen, if you mount the camera on a tripod here, you will basically not see the screen at all, so it becomes completely pointless unless you're vlogging from the hand in this way. But then, knowing that the face tracking will work in daytime scenarios, you could just vlog in a standard no screen way, and it will do a great job with your tripod attached. And if you're attached to any kind of a Gorilla Pod or tripod that you'll be vlogging the old-fashioned way without the monitor, even if you mount a microphone at the top, you get the lens even further away from you and it will track your face. As long as you know how to composition a shot just by looking at the lens, it will do a great job. And this way you're getting a nice stabilized shot because the lens got the VR built in. I tend to choose the stabilization as sport in video and only just on the stabilization on in photos. In sport, because you're moving the camera, it seems to having a more smoother stabilization than trying to lock the composition in one place. So that's how I vlog on the Z6 as well as on this sport mode stabilization. Definitely way better for vlogging. You can also enable the electronic stabilization on top of it. It would crop the image a little bit. I prefer not to do it. The electronic stabilization on any camera just isn't that good. You'd rather re-stabilize it in post using warp stabilizer or whatever stabilizer that it is available in your editing suite. That will do a much better job anyway. The built-in microphone is okay, however I always recommend getting at least a Rode VideoMic Go or some kind of a 25 pounds microphone on top and connecting it to the microphone port on the side. What you do not get on the Z50 is an audio output, so you only get a microphone in, so the only way to listen to the clips that you recorded is by listening using the speaker built into the Z50. But then it is much less pro camera than the Z50 and it costs much less too, so there are some compromises. Lastly, while on the subject of vlogging, I've noticed that the setting of self-portrait has to be off if you want to vlog with the screen towards you and the face tracking to work. In order to trigger the face tracking, yes, you put on the autofocus setting of face tracking on, you choose the full autofocus screen area and you put the camera autofocus in the AFF mode. However, it feels a little bit counterintuitive naming, because the self-portrait mode, you would have thought that would be specifically for something to do with face tracking and vlogging with this mode. It had to be off. If I turned the camera down, then face tracking was available in the sort of upside down mode when the screen turns into sort of a normal viewing screen. When I had the monitor like this, even with the self-portrait mode on, the face tracking was working. So I don't know, some sort of a weird little system glitch, but hopefully if you run into this problem, this will help you. And lastly, photos. I don't want to talk too much about photos because I like the Nikon color profiles, just how the images look. And pretty much if you shoot RAW, any recent decent full frame or APS-C camera will deliver pretty much same quality photos depending on how you edit it. It all depends on the sharpness of the lenses as well. But most cameras nowadays for photos are very similar, so I don't want to focus too much on photos. I shot photos with it. They were great, and if you want to check out a detailed comparison of ISO levels, my friend Ricci, who works at Nikon, did a great video comparing the Z6 and the Z50 at how by increasing ISO levels does the noise creep into the shadows, and it wasn't such a dramatic difference. It really was only visible at really high ISO. So yeah, for photos it's a great camera, and the sharpness really only depends on the lenses that you use and how good of a photographer are you. Let's wrap things up with the great things, the good things that I like about this camera and the things that I not necessarily like about the camera. First, quickly on the negative points on the camera. I was quite surprised when Nikon made the decision to make the sensor not stabilized, yet the lenses will be stabilized. It felt a little bit weird to me, because if you want to buy a very cool, sharp, great full frame prime lens, then when you put it on the Z50 you'll have no stabilization. Yet you don't really want to put the DX lenses on a Z6, for example, even if you chose video crop mode, because it will only stabilize it by the sensor or the lens, and I think it's the sensor. It will just not use the stabilization on the lens at all. I think Nikon really should have gone down the way of making the sensor stabilized and also the DX native Z lenses not stabilized. Then everything would be stabilized, and putting even non-stabilized lenses on the Z50, the sensor would stabilize them like it does in the Z6. So that decision, to me, a bit controversial, and I would have preferred if they stabilized the body rather than the lenses. Secondly, it's something that it's just missing. It's the lack of a further crop into the 4K or 1080p mode. You only get the full sensor readout, which is DX. You don't get any further crop modes. I would really like that. I think it would be possible. I'm pretty sure it's possible. It would just be a different algorithm of how the sensor bins the pixels or does pixel to pixel 4K video. That would be cool. Maybe it's something that could be introduced in a future update. Who knows? The whole flip down screen. Well, I would ideally want it to flip up. You could have the tripod or a gorilla pod or anything attached to the bottom, yet you would still see your screen, or just flip to the side. Now that would have been, really revolutionary for Nikon, and it would have made this camera a brilliant vlogger's camera. The flip down, however, it's okay to vlog like this. But I touched the focusing ring a few times and it defocused and I lost the face tracking. It's not ideal, if you can't attach a tripod and still see what you're doing, it's not really a vlogger's camera. Some people were suggesting crazy ideas to get some sort of an adapter that you would put to the flash mount and attach the tripod from this way, but then you would need to put the microphones some sideways, attach it to the tripod. I don't know, not the best idea. It's okay that it's there. I would prefer a different mechanism for vlogging. This camera, maybe the monitor flipping up or just flipping sideways, would have really done a great job. Lastly, it's got the same method of charging the battery via a USB port from like a power bank that the Z6 has. It can only do it when the camera is off. It would be lovely to see a way of powering the camera where it's still operating, so you can do really long-term time lapses by just swapping battery banks and connecting the USB basically forever. It would be really cool, but unfortunately it is just the same sort of a power method as the Z6. It can only power the battery inside when the camera is off. While on the battery, I could not find an option in the menus where I could find out the exact percentage of the battery. You literally just get the 4 bars and there's no way of finding out the exact number of percents that your battery is. A bit weird, that setting should be there. It's got less buttons on the body. I like buttons. Buttons get you quicker access to what you need. So I know it's aimed for a different level of photographers. I would prefer just more buttons like there is on the Z6. And lastly, the same video problem that the Z6 have. In aperture priority mode, if you're shooting video, there is no way to set the minimum shutter speed because you never want to really go down below 50th of a second. There are some really rare instances that I would need the sort of light capability of not raising ISO that I would shoot at 1/25th. However, in aperture priority mode, the camera will, the shutter will go down to 1/25th and then we'll start raising ISO. Sometimes where it's just a little bit dark, the ISOs would go to 200 or 400. I'd rather the shutter to stay at 1/50th before the ISO starts increasing than drop it down to 1/25th. It's an aesthetical sort of a 180-degree shutter rule. It's a pleasing video to watch rather than a 1/25th when you're shooting 25p or 24p. The Z6 has the same thing. I'm sure Nikon can fix that and make sure that you can choose for the ISO to kick in either at 1/50th or 1/25th of a second, or if you're shooting slow-mo to not go slower than 1/100th or 1/200th of a second. That setting is available in photo mode, that you can choose what's the minimum shutter speed before the ISO kicks in. So I'm pretty sure it can also be implemented in video mode, and it should really be implemented in the Z50 as well as the Z6. But don't get me wrong, there are quite a few negatives that I just mentioned about this camera, but some are not really negatives. They're just the exact same way that, for example, the Z6 operate, that I got used to. I've got my workarounds around, same things. But let's now move on to all the positive things about the camera, and I think there's quite a few positives about it. Firstly, as predominantly I shoot time-lapse, I am excited that this camera does the same time-lapse capabilities that the Z6 does, which is amazing for a camera that's almost half the price. The body at the moment is at £749 only, and with the latest price drops for the Z6 is £1,400, which is still a phenomenal bargain what you get for the camera that's filming at the moment, a full frame Z6 camera. This is half the price. If it was my choice, I'd rather have a Z6 and a Z50. I probably would never buy the Z7 because I'd rather have two bodies for the price of just one Z7. I can cover more angles. So the price of this camera is exciting. Would I get the package that includes the two other lenses? Probably not, because I do have other lenses that I could just use on this camera. But if you are new and thinking of investing into a mirrorless system and want to try and have a really light setup, this camera with the two lenses and the bundle deal that's $999 is a brilliant price as a sort of starting first mirrorless camera or first sort of upgrade into a bigger interchangeable lens system. That's a brilliant deal, $999. What you get for that price is an amazing camera with two lenses that cover a huge focal range. The quality of the video, 4K and 1080 and slow-mo on this camera is just brilliant. It's just as good as the Z6, which is a really big surprise to me. So that's a huge benefit to this camera. The autofocus face tracking, at least during the daytime, as the nighttime was a bit different, is great on this camera. It can literally be a small vlogging setup, very portable. And being used to the Z6, I'm still baffled how light it is, how compact the lenses are. It's just such a small system. It takes no space in your back and it doesn't weigh almost nothing. When I use this camera as a sort of DX 20 megapixel dedicated time-lapse body, it gave me the extra 1.5 magnification. I still remain the 20 megapixels. So as a second body, if you need extra length, extra focal millimeters multiplier, instead of using a teleconverter that will reduce the quality a little bit, having a DX body is a great addition to your camera kit. The fact that it works with the FTZ adapter and all the F-mount lenses, it autofocuses and uses the F-mount lenses built-in stabilization, if that lens has one, is just great. It just works with the variety of F-mount lenses you might have had from the past. But then at the end, it all comes down to the price. If I was to go for a body only Z50, it's £750. And it's so close to getting a used Z60 body, which I saw on eBay because a friend was asking me like, which one would you rather get now? And I saw on eBay that the Z6 is used or with the FTZ mount adapter, they're going for around 1,000 or 1,100. So $750 for a new Z50 or just £250 more for a Z6. And Z6 is an absolute beast. Even now with the RAW capabilities that you have to pay an extra £200 for it to get done on your camera, but you're getting a full frame RAW 4K video camera, not to mention, you know, just a good quality and all the features that the Z6 has. I don't know, it's a tough question. This is great, small DX lenses, amazing if you're starting with it, or if you want the two lenses to go travel and go light and have only a small microphone on top. But if you're thinking in the long term, if you're thinking ever to get prime lenses and better lenses for your camera system, I still think just get that extra £200-300, maybe even get a used Z6. I think how cheap it is, I am just surprised why the price of the Z6 has been plummeting so much, because at £1,400 it's an absolute steal, the Z6. I think it's 1,460 if you get it with the FTZ adapter, which is just, yeah, getting the FTZ adapter for like £60. Again, an absolute steal of a bundle deal. So when you're thinking about getting the Z50 or the Z6, my final decision would be either get the used Z6 or just, yeah, spend a little bit of extra cash and do get the Z6. It is an absolute steal. It's a great camera for some people that don't have other F-mount lenses or will never be getting prime Z-mount full-frame lenses. It's brilliant and it does an amazing stuff. If you're ever thinking into upgrading your quality and your lenses a little bit more, I would still say get the Z6. The price is just so low, it's rude not to. I hope you found this review useful in your decision-making process, and if you did like this video, leave me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, click the thumbs down twice, please. Ask me in the comments if I missed something that you'd be really interested about the Z50, because I might know it, I might have tried it. Thanks again for watching the video, I appreciate your support, and if you're interested in similar videos like this, as well as future videos about travel, architecture and time-lapse, please consider subscribing for more videos, and I will see you guys in the next one. The weather behind me has been changing ridiculously. It's really cold and windy. I was scared about this tripod falling over at some point. Glad it didn't. Let's pack up.